The air inside the courtroom was thick with tension. Spectators filled the wooden benches, murmuring amongst themselves as they stole glances at the defendant, Mark Callahan, a respected businessman in his late 40s. His hands rested on the cold wooden table before him, his jaw clenched, eyes darting nervously between his lawyer and the judge. At the prosecution table sat Catherine Katie Williams, a 17-year-old girl with auburn hair tied into a neat ponytail. She wore a modest blue dress, her hands clenched in her lap as she avoided eye contact with Mark. Beside her sat her attorney, Janet Parker, a fierce advocate for victims of abuse and fraud. This was not just another paternity case. It was a storm of accusations, deceit, and shattered identities. Judge William McCarthy, a no-nonsense man with decades of experience, adjusted his glasses as he reviewed the documents before him. He had seen countless cases of family disputes, but something about this one felt off. The trial had been dragging on for weeks. Mark Callahan had been paying child support for Katie since she was a baby. He had never doubted that she was his daughter until now. A DNA test had thrown everything into chaos. The results stated, without a shred of doubt, that Mark was not Katie's biological father. Yet, despite the shocking revelation, he continued to insist, "She is my daughter. The test is wrong." Janet Parker, Katie's attorney, stood up. "Your Honor, the DNA evidence clearly states that my client is not related to the defendant. We request an immediate dismissal of paternity obligations and legal action for fraud." Mark's lawyer, a stout man with graying hair, adjusted his tie. "Your Honor, we contest the results. There could have been an error in the testing. My client has raised this girl since birth. He deserves a fair chance to prove his case." The judge sighed and nodded. "We'll hear arguments. But let's be clear, science rarely makes mistakes. If there was an error, you'll need substantial proof." Katie shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The world was watching her. News channels had already picked up the case, dubbing it the Callahan scandal. She knew the truth. She had lived with it for years. But before this day was over, the world would know too. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "This is it," she thought. "The moment that will change everything." The trial continued. Witnesses were called. Lies unfolded. And then, when the tension reached its peak, Katie stood up, interrupting the proceedings with a voice so loud, so clear, that it silenced the entire courtroom. "He is not my dad." The judge turned pale. A stunned silence swept through the courtroom. Every eye turned toward Katie. Judge McCarthy, normally composed, felt his grip tighten on his gavel. His pale complexion mirrored the shock that spread across the room. Mark Callahan's face drained of color. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Janet Parker, Katie's attorney, placed a hand on the girl's arm as if to steady her. "Katie, what do you mean?" she asked gently. Katie took a deep breath, her voice firm yet trembling with raw emotion. "He's not my dad. He never was. And I can prove it." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. The judge banged his gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" McCarthy turned his gaze toward Katie. "Young lady, you cannot simply interrupt a trial like this. If you have evidence, present it properly." Katie's gaze hardened. "I have evidence, Your Honor. But first, I need to ask Mark Callahan one question." The judge hesitated, then nodded. "Proceed." Katie turned toward the man who had claimed to be her father for 17 years. "Mark, tell me this. Where was I born?" Mark blinked, the question catching him off guard. You were born in St. Mary's Hospital, just outside of Chicago." Katie's lips curled into a bitter smile. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document, her fingers gripping it tightly. "No, I wasn't," she said, unfolding the paper. "I was born in Phoenix, Arizona, not Chicago, and I have my original birth certificate to prove it." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Mark's lawyer jumped up. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. This document should have been presented beforehand." Judge McCarthy raised a hand. "Sit down, counselor." I want to hear where this is going. Mark was visibly shaking now. His fingers curled into fists on the table. I don't understand. What is this? Katie stepped forward, handing the document to the bailiff, who brought it to the judge. McCarthy adjusted his glasses and examined the certificate. His expression darkened. This is indeed an official birth certificate from Phoenix, Arizona, he murmured. The listed father's name is not Mark Callahan. A heavy silence settled over the room. Janet Parker stood up. Your Honor, I believe my client has more to say, and I suggest we listen. Judge McCarthy nodded slowly, the weight of the revelation settling on him. Go ahead, Katie. Katie's eyes locked onto Mark's. You lied to me my whole life, but it's over now. I know who my real father is, and you're not him. Mark Callahan's face twisted in a mix of fear and fury. He opened his mouth to speak, but for the first time he had no words, because deep down, he knew the truth was finally catching up to him. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the truth began to unfold. Judge McCarthy placed the birth certificate down and rubbed his temple, clearly trying to make sense of the revelation. Mark Callahan sat frozen, his breathing ragged. His lawyer leaned toward him and whispered, but Mark didn't respond. His eyes were locked on Katie, his expression unreadable. Katie clenched her fists. You always told me that my mother died giving birth to me in Chicago. That's a lie, isn't it? Mark finally found his voice, though it was hoarse and shaky. Katie, I raised you, cared for you. That should mean something. Katie shook her head, her voice growing stronger. You didn't answer my question. My mother didn't die in childbirth, did she? The air in the courtroom felt heavy. Everyone was waiting for his answer. Mark swallowed hard. No, she didn't. Gasps filled the room. Katie's heart pounded in her chest. Even though she had suspected the truth, hearing it confirmed sent a wave of emotions crashing over her. Judge McCarthy's voice was sharp. Mr. Callahan, you need to explain yourself. Right now. Mark wiped a hand over his face, his body trembling. I did what I had to do. I wanted a family. I wanted a daughter. And she... He stopped, his throat tightening. Katie stepped forward. Who is my real father? Mark shook his head. No, I won't tell you. The judge banged his gavel. You don't have a choice, Mr. Callahan. Either you tell us the truth now, or I will hold you in contempt of court. Mark's lawyer leaned in again, whispering furiously. But Mark just sat there, shoulders slumped, defeated. Finally, he sighed and whispered, her father is still alive. Katie's knees nearly buckled. Her entire life, she had believed she was an orphan, that the man who raised her was the only family she had left. And now, she was hearing that her real father was still out there. The room was silent, hanging on to every word. Janet Parker took a deep breath. Then tell us where he is. Mark hesitated, shaking his head. I can't. If I do, everything will fall apart. Judge McCarthy's patience was wearing thin. His gavel slammed against the desk. Mr. Callahan, I am giving you one last chance. Where is Katie's real father? Mark looked up, his eyes filled with regret. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, he's been looking for her for 17 years. A stunned silence filled the room. Katie's breath caught in her throat. Somewhere out there, a man had been searching for her all this time, and Mark Callahan had kept them apart. The weight of Mark Callahan's confession sent a ripple of shock through the courtroom. Judge McCarthy leaned forward, his fingers tapping impatiently on the bench. Are you saying that you took this child, this girl, from her real father and kept her hidden for 17 years? Mark lowered his head. I didn't take her, he muttered. I saved her. Katie felt her breath hitch. Saved me? From what? Mark's lips trembled, but he remained silent. Janet Parker wasn't about to let the moment slip away. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, my client deserves the full truth. This man has admitted to lying about her parentage and withholding information about her biological father. I move that we subpoena any and all records regarding Katie's past, including hospital records, legal adoption papers, if they exist, and any documentation regarding her supposed mother. Judge McCarthy nodded sternly. Motion granted. He turned to Mark. Mr. Callahan, you are required to hand over any documents that pertain to this case immediately, and if you fail to cooperate, I will ensure the full weight of the law comes down on you. Mark clenched his fists, shaking his head. I can't. I just can't. Katie slammed her hands onto the table. Stop saying that. You don't get to decide what I know anymore. Tell me the truth. Mark's lawyer whispered urgently, but Mark waved him away. He exhaled sharply, looking at Katie with tired eyes. Your mother was a runaway, he finally said. She was running from your father, and I was the one who helped her escape. The courtroom filled with hushed gasps. Katie's mind spun. Escape? Why? What was she running from? Mark swallowed. Your father was a powerful man. Dangerous. Your mother was terrified of him. She came to me, begging for help. She wanted to disappear, so I helped her. I changed her name. I took care of her while she was pregnant. And when she gave birth, he hesitated, then looked directly at Katie. She didn't die in childbirth. She disappeared. I helped her vanish. Katie's pulse pounded in her ears. You mean, she's alive? Mark hesitated. I don't know anymore. She swore she'd never come back. She told me to raise you as my own and to never let him find you. Katie's mind reeled. Her mother alive? Her father dangerous? The story she had believed her whole life was nothing but a fabrication. Judge McCarthy's face was unreadable as he folded his hands. Mr. Callahan, do you have any proof to support this? Mark hesitated before nodding. I have letters. From her. She wrote to me for the first few years, making sure Katie was safe. Then, she just stopped. I haven't heard from her in over a decade. Janet Parker's voice was firm. Then we need those letters. The judge nodded. Mr. Callahan, you are ordered to provide those letters to the court immediately. Mark's shoulders sagged in defeat. Fine, he murmured. I'll get them. Katie felt her entire world shifting beneath her feet. Her mother had left her. Her real father had been searching for her. And Mark Callahan, the man who had raised her, had been hiding the truth all along. But there was one question still unanswered. Who was her real father? And why had her mother been so desperate to keep her away from him? Katie's world was crumbling. A father she never knew existed. A mother who vanished. And a man, Victor Langley, who had been searching for her. Judge McCarthy leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. Mr. Callahan, you've withheld crucial information from the court, and worse, from this young woman. But I have to ask, if Victor Langley has been searching for her, how has he not found her yet? Mark hesitated. His face was grim. Because I made sure he couldn't. I changed Katie's records when she was a baby. Birth certificate, social security details. Everything. As far as the system was concerned, Catherine Williams didn't exist. And if you don't exist, you can't be found. Katie's breath caught in her throat. Janet Parker was quick to respond. That's fraud, Mr. Callahan. You realize the legal consequences. Mark held up a hand. I don't care. I did what I had to do to keep her safe. But it doesn't matter anymore. Because... He took a deep breath, his voice lowering. Langley already knows. A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Judge McCarthy narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? Mark's voice was barely above a whisper. 3 weeks ago, I got a phone call. Katie tensed. From who? Mark's lips pressed into a tight line. From him. From Victor Langley. A shiver ran down Katie's spine. He knows. The realization sent her mind spiraling. Mark exhaled shakily. He said he had people digging through records. He told me that he suspected his ex, your mother, had given birth before she disappeared. He said he was close to confirming it. And he warned me. Katie's throat went dry. Warned you about what? Mark's hands clenched into fists. That if I was hiding anything from him, I would regret it. Judge McCarthy's face darkened. Mr. Callahan, are you saying you are in danger? Mark nodded slowly. Not just me. Katie too. Katie's heart pounded in her chest. Judge McCarthy sighed heavily. This case has taken a drastic turn. This is no longer just about paternity. We may be dealing with a matter of personal safety. Janet Parker, though a hardened lawyer, looked genuinely unsettled. Your Honor, I recommend that we immediately request protection for my client. If Victor Langley truly is as powerful as his reputation suggests, then Katie may be in real danger. Katie's mind was still spinning. She had walked into the courtroom today thinking she was about to be freed from a legal tie to a man who had deceived her. Instead, she had uncovered a life she never knew existed. A father who wasn't her father. A mother who had vanished. And a real father who was coming for her. Judge McCarthy looked directly at Katie. Miss Williams, do you want to meet your biological father? Katie hesitated. Every instinct screamed no, but a part of her needed answers. She swallowed hard. I want to know the truth. The judge nodded, his face unreadable. Then the court will proceed with the necessary legal actions. But I suggest you prepare yourself, young lady, because once Victor Langley learns where you are, he sighed, there will be no going back. Katie closed her eyes, her pulse racing. Somewhere out there, a man with limitless power and resources had just found out she existed. And soon he would come for her. The courtroom had transformed from a legal battleground into something far more sinister, a waiting game in which Katie was the unwilling prize. Judge McCarthy's expression remained grim as he looked down at Mark Callahan. Mr. Callahan, I'll be issuing an immediate order to retrieve the letters you mentioned. In the meantime, I need to know, how certain are you that Victor Langley is aware of Katie's existence? Mark's jaw tightened. 100%. He didn't say it outright, but he knew enough. He knows that my daughter, the one I've raised, is not biologically mine. And if Victor Langley suspects something, he doesn't stop until he gets the truth. Katie's fingers curled into her palms, nails pressing into her skin. She felt the weight of the room shift toward her. Every eye locked on her like she was some kind of missing artifact that had just been rediscovered. She turned toward Janet Parker. If he really is dangerous, shouldn't we be talking about protection? A restraining order. Janet pursed her lips. That's tricky. A restraining order would only be granted if there's a direct, immediate threat of harm. As of now, Victor Langley hasn't made any explicit threats. Mark interrupted, his voice cold. You don't understand. He doesn't need to make threats. He acts. And by the time you see it coming, it's too late. The room was silent. Judge McCarthy exhaled heavily. Then we need to act preemptively. He turned to Janet. What do you suggest? Janet was already scribbling notes. I'll file a request for a private security detail. In the meantime, I want a sealed hearing to determine whether Victor Langley has the legal grounds to seek out Katie. Katie felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Wait, what do you mean legal grounds? I don't want anything to do with him. Janet gave her a knowing look. That's not how this works. If Langley pushes for a paternity claim, if he proves he's your biological father, he could petition for legal rights. He might not want custody, but he could argue that he has the right to meet you. Or worse, claim you as part of his family estate. Katie's breath hitched. You mean, I wouldn't even have a choice? Judge McCarthy's voice was firm. The court would always take your interests into consideration. But with someone like Langley, things get complicated. Mark's voice was barely above a whisper. That's exactly why your mother ran. Katie clenched her fists. Then I need to find her. If she's alive, she's the only one who can tell me the truth. Janet sighed. Easier said than done. We don't even know where she is. Mark hesitated. I have an idea. Every head turned toward him. Judge McCarthy frowned. Explain. Mark exhaled sharply. The last letter she sent me. She mentioned a place. A safe house. She didn't say exactly where it was, but she called it the Red Orchid. Katie frowned. What is that? A code name? Mark shook his head. No, it's real. It's the name of a private retreat she talked about before she disappeared. She always said that if things got bad, that's where she would go. Janet nodded, jotting it down. Then we start there. Katie's mind raced. If her mother was out there, hiding, then maybe she had the answers Katie needed. But there was just one problem. If Mark was right, and Victor Langley had already uncovered the truth, then he might already be looking for her too. Katie barely felt her feet beneath her as she walked out of the courtroom. The moment Judge McCarthy adjourned the session, reporters swarmed outside the courthouse doors, their voices rising in a chaotic blur. "Katie, do you have a statement about your real father? Mr. Callahan, did you knowingly commit identity fraud?" Victor Langley has yet to respond. "Do you plan to meet him?" Her pulse pounded. They knew. The courtroom wasn't the only place where her secret had unraveled. Someone had leaked the story. And if the press knew, it was only a matter of time before he did. Janet Parker shielded her, ushering her toward a waiting car. "Keep your head down. Don't answer anything. We need to control this." Katie barely processed the ride back to Janet's office. The entire world felt like it was spinning. Her father was alive, powerful, dangerous, and possibly looking for her. She turned to Mark, who sat beside her, staring blankly ahead. "If he finds me, what do you think he'll do?" Mark exhaled sharply. "I don't know." That terrified her more than anything. The car pulled up to Janet's downtown office, a tall, modern glass building that somehow felt too open, too vulnerable. As they stepped out, Janet's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and her face paled. "It's him." Katie's stomach twisted. "Victor Langley?" Janet nodded. "His legal team just reached out. He's requesting an immediate private meeting." Mark cursed under his breath. That was fast. Katie's hands trembled. "What do I do?" Janet's gaze was firm. "That depends. Do you want to meet him?" Katie's heart pounded. Did she? She had spent years thinking she was an orphan. Then, in the span of hours, she had gone from Mark Callahan's daughter to Victor Langley's unknown heir. And now he wanted to see her. She swallowed hard. "Not yet. Not until we find my mom." Janet nodded. "Then we stall." Mark turned to Janet. "What do we tell him?" Janet sighed. "The truth part of it. That Katie is not prepared to meet him yet. That we need time." Katie frowned. "Will he accept that?" Janet hesitated before shaking her head. "No, but it'll buy us a little time." Katie exhaled slowly. Time. That's what they needed. Because if Victor Langley had spent years searching for her, he wouldn't stop now. And Katie wasn't ready for what came next. Katie barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined a faceless man standing in the shadows, waiting, watching. By morning, the media frenzy had intensified. News outlets ran headlines like, "Red Circle billionaire Victor Langley's secret daughter revealed." "Red Circle 17-year-old heir found after mysterious disappearance." "Red Circle, who is Katie Williams? And why was she hidden?" Janet Parker paced her office, her phone buzzing nonstop. His team isn't backing down. They want to set up a meeting immediately. Mark sat in the corner, rubbing his temples. "Damn it. We need more time." Katie felt like a caged animal. "What if I just refuse to meet him?" Janet sighed. "Legally, you can. But avoiding him won't stop him. If Victor Langley wants something, he gets it. And right now, he wants to meet you." The weight of those words settled in Katie's chest. Before she could respond, Janet's assistant stepped in, her face pale. "Janet, you need to see this." She handed Janet a tablet. The screen displayed a live video feed, a news broadcast from outside Langley Tower, Victor Langley's corporate headquarters. A black luxury car pulled up to the entrance. The cameras zoomed in as the door opened, and out stepped a tall man with silver-streaked black hair and piercing blue eyes. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, exuding power with every step. The reporters swarmed, shouting questions. Victor Langley barely acknowledged them as he adjusted his cufflinks. But then he stopped, turned, looked directly into the nearest camera. His voice was smooth, but there was something chilling beneath it. I would like to make something very clear. I have just learned that I have a daughter. For 17 years, I was kept in the dark. I do not take deception lightly. He paused. His blue eyes seemed to darken. But I am a reasonable man. Catherine, if you are watching, I would like to meet you. Privately. No media. No lawyers. Just us. A shiver ran down Katie's spine. Victor Langley wasn't just asking. He was calling her out. Janet's grip on the tablet tightened. This is bad. He's forcing your hand. Mark shook his head. Damn it. He's playing the public like a chessboard. If she refuses now, she looks guilty. Like she's the one hiding. Katie's heart pounded. She had spent her life in the shadows, hidden from this man. And now, in front of the entire world, he was demanding she step into the light. Katie took a shaky breath. I need to meet him. Mark's eyes widened. Katie, no. She turned to Janet. You said I couldn't avoid him forever. So I won't. I'll meet him, but on my terms. Janet hesitated, then nodded. Then we need to control the situation. We pick the location. We set the rules. And we make sure you're protected. Mark's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. Katie exhaled. It was time to face the man who had been searching for her all her life, and she had no idea what he would do when he finally found her. The air was thick with tension as Katie stepped into the dimly lit private lounge of Langley Tower. The meeting had been arranged on her terms, neutral ground, security present, no media. But none of that changed the fact that she was about to meet the most powerful, dangerous man she had ever known. Her father. Victor Langley stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the city skyline. He didn't turn immediately. Instead, he let the silence stretch between them, commanding control without a single word. Katie forced herself to stand tall. You wanted to meet me. Here I am. Slowly, Victor turned. His piercing blue eyes locked onto her, scanning her face with eerie precision. Finally, he spoke. You look like her. Katie's breath caught. My mother. Victor nodded, his expression unreadable. Yes. He took a step closer. Where is she? Katie tensed. I don't know. Victor studied her carefully. And yet, you're here. That means Mark Callahan told you something. Katie swallowed. He told me that she ran from you. That she was afraid of you. Victor's lips twitched into something that might have been amusement. Is that what he told you? He exhaled slowly. I never hurt her, Katie. Your mother left because she believed she was protecting you. But she never understood one thing. Katie clenched her fists. And what's that? Victor took another step forward. No one runs from me forever. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Victor studied her again, as if piecing together a puzzle. Then he spoke, his voice quieter but no less commanding. You have a choice, Catherine. You can walk away from here, continue hiding, living a life in secrecy like your mother did. Or, he reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a single envelope. You can read this letter, and finally learn the truth. Katie's hands trembled as she took the envelope. Her name was scrawled across the front in delicate, feminine handwriting. Her mother's handwriting. She looked up at Victor. You had this all along? Victor's expression remained unreadable. Your mother left it behind before she disappeared. I never opened it. I figured one day, you'd come looking for the truth yourself. Katie's breath hitched. Her entire life, she had been searching for answers. And now she held them in her hands. She tore open the envelope, unfolding the letter with shaking fingers. The words blurred at first, but as she read, her world changed forever. My dearest Katie, if you're reading this, it means he found you. I never wanted it to happen this way. I never wanted you to be caught in this war. But I had to keep you safe. Your father, Victor, he is not the monster I once believed. But he is powerful. And power comes with danger. The truth is, I never ran from him because I feared him. I ran because I feared the people around him. I knew that if they found out about you, you would never be free. I had to give you a chance at a normal life, away from all of this. But I was wrong. I see that now. I should have told you sooner. I should have trusted you to make your own choice. So now I leave that choice in your hands. Whatever path you take, know that I love you, and I always will. Mom tears blurred Katie's vision. She looked up at Victor, her heart pounding. You never chased her, did you? Victor exhaled. No, Katie swallowed. Then why are you chasing me now? Victor's expression finally softened. Just a little. Because I lost her. I won't lose you too. Katie stood there, the letter clutched in her trembling hands, knowing that no matter what she chose next, her life would never be the same.